Today we leave the world of music behind and go to the world of literature, German literature, and in fact a book by Johann Wolfgang von Goethe. Now that name, wow, Goethe. It looks like it's Goethe. In fact, I lived on the corner of Beethoven and Goethe streets. They were supposed to be Beethoven and Goethe streets, but I was in Binghamton, New York, and nobody except the builder knew how to pronounce the name, so they called it Beethoven and Goethe. But that Goethe, it's written as OE because there's a very strange vowel in German. Normally it's an O with two dots over it. We call that an umlaut. And what that means is that your mouth forms an O, but your tongue forms an E. And you get OE, E. And so that's how you pronounce the vowels, E. And so it's G with its E, and then a TH is a T, just like in Beethoven. Goethe. Goethe. Worth practicing. Hard name to say. But he's the guy who wrote this book, The Sorrows of Young Werther. And let me tell you a little bit about Goethe. To begin with, he's almost exactly a contemporary of Beethoven. He died a little bit after Beethoven. He was actually born 20 or 21 years before Beethoven. So his growing up was in that late 19th, 18th century. But then all the time that Beethoven was alive, so was Goethe with the same experiences, going through the Napoleonic Wars and all those changes. But there is a difference in where they grew up. Beethoven was born in Bonn and then moved to Austria or Vienna, which was the capital of the Holy Roman Empire, run by the Austrians, the one group of Germans. And then Goethe was born in Frankfurt, still part of the Austrian-Hungarian Empire, but his allegiance was to the Prussians. They were still part of the empire, but by the 19th century, they're going to be fighting for who's going to run the German-speaking world. So they were on two sides of this German question. Goethe was not born noble, but he eventually was knighted, so he becomes von Goethe. Beethoven thought he was born noble, van Beethoven, from the Dutch side of his family. Turns out the court said he wasn't, and so he becomes just plain Beethoven. A reverse path there, but they were both middle class. Goethe is born and he becomes a government official for the Duke of, I think it's Saxe Weimar. And so there's this little duchy that's a part of the Prussian part of the empire. And Goethe becomes this very important political figure, kind of a cabinet level figure, Bureau of Mines, things like that. But he becomes a very important and very effective government leader, really a good bureaucrat. So this is strange. He worked his whole life and he had a day job, and the day job was a very important one. In addition to that, he was a scientist, at least of sorts. He wrote a couple of books. The most important ones, he wrote a book on metamorphosis in plants, and another one was a theory of color, it's really a theory of light and color. That was quite influential. It's got out of favor because Newton had a different view of what light was. Some people have taken some parts of it and brought it back, but it was important at the time. So he was an important scientist, and yet that's not what he's remembered for today. Here's this guy who spent time on science and government, but he was a writer. He was a poet and a beloved poet. If you look at music at that time period, songs were written based on poetry. They didn't have lyricists. You just picked poems. And everybody said Goethe poems. Some composers did 50 or 60 different songs, all based on Goethe poems. Very important poet. He was also a playwright of some importance. His most famous works are his two Faust plays, part 1 and 2. They're massive. If you put them both on, they take like 24 hours. These plays are massive. But it's a story of this intellectual, very highly achieved guy who's very dissatisfied with his life, who sells his soul to the devil so that he can have experiences. It's an old story, but he puts a new twist on it. We're not going to read that. It's way too long. We're instead going to eventually read Egmont, which is a much more manageable play. And then on top of that, he was a novelist. And so he wrote some novels, but the one we will read is his first, The Sorrows of Young Werther. It's short, about 110 pages. And it's really kind of interesting because he was in his 20s and he writes this novel and it launches him into international fame. I mean, fame instantly. He becomes a superstar, a legend. This wasn't happening 100 years before. People were hired by counts or dukes to write music or write poetry for their dinners, basically. Artists were servants. And now we're hitting this new era where people will write things to be sold, to sell to publishers. And you can become very famous. You can also become very poor. But Goethe became very, very, very famous very fast. This is a very interesting novel. It's what we call an epistolary novel. It's written as letters. So they're not like the modern ones that we see where the obvious. Dear so and so, it's been such a long time since I've seen you. Hope you are doing well. I am doing fine, and every page has that somewhere. Goethe skips that and gets right to the meat of it, but he still tells the story as if they're letters home. That's the one thing that makes it interesting, but it's also a story of a young man's obsessive love. And so it's classic romanticism. It's this, it's love and intense emotions and all the things we expect from romanticism. Also, the link between the human and nature, when civilization's a bad thing, nature's a good thing. This pure experience of what it is to be. Very romantic concept, and this is what's going to make a very interesting comparison between Goethe and Beethoven. We're trying to figure out what people thought at this time period. Beethoven's Eroica Symphony was very, very popular. So in Austria, anyway, people were embracing what he had to say. Now remember, he wrote this thing where he stretched the form, so it's very romantic in that sense. And he's writing about a great man, an individual, Napoleon. That's romantic, the great man theory, romanticism. At the same time, he's writing about democracy, which is an Enlightenment value. And all his movements have form and structure. He's still very interested in form and structure. Those are Enlightenment values. Goethe is a scientist. Do you think that's an Enlightenment value? He is a government official, which could mean belief in anything, but he believed in hard work, efficiency, and helping the everyman. So he seems like an Enlightenment guy, but his writing is much more about individual passion. And so I think you're going to find a lot of romance in it, but you're also going to find a certain amount of Enlightenment thinking. Beethoven and Goethe look like they're sort of two sides of the same coin. They respected each other, by the way. They knew about each other. Beethoven wrote music for the Egmont play, so they knew each other, but they knew of each other, but they didn't meet till very late in Beethoven's life, near the end. So here are these two giants, and these guys were giants. They were, I mean, this is like Beyonce, that level of giant. These two giants finally met. They spent a week together. Again, immense mutual respect, but not a lot of liking. They were very polite to each other. They spent the time together. They never badmouthed at each other, but they seemed to not hit it off very well, and they never met again, and they didn't have a great letter writing campaign or a great friendship. Beethoven died soon thereafterwards anyway. So these two giants who are so much the same and so different at the same time. And I hope that you're going to really enjoy getting to know them as we get to know this novel. You're going to read the first part of it, the book one. It's about 55 pages, just about half the book, From the Sorrows of Young Werther. Oh, Werther, spells with a W, in German pronounced with a V, TH is pronounced as a T, Werther, The Sorrows of Young Werther. I hope you enjoy it.